Nonetheless, we are live and we are public once again. Your favorite place to out on a Tuesday. I'm Mike Scala, joined by Jay Carter, chair of BLM Tokyo, also known as Timid, the great hip hop artist. And we've got another guest with us here this week. We have Democratic District Leader Mufazzal Hossein, Part B of Assembly District 38. Thank you for joining us, Mufazzal.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So we're going to get into some heavier topics as we do on this live stream, but we'd like to start off with something a little light. And what better than what happened at the Oscars, of course, maybe played out already. It happened only 2 days ago. It's all you saw on social media Sunday night and throughout Monday. So by now, I think people are tired of it, but this is the first live stream that we're doing since it happened. So I guess we can give our thoughts briefly on what transpired. By now, everybody knows about it.
Well, from my perspective, I saw a man who got aggravated by another man who made a joke about his wife. It's as simple as that. Whether Chris knew about Jada's condition or not, you do not make a joke about somebody's physical appearances, especially if that person is a woman. It's not, we always think about, oh, that's this person's sister or this person's daughter or this person's mother or this person's wife or girlfriend. But what we should be looking at is, and what we should be thinking before making fun of women for their appearances, is the fact that they are humans. And that is something Chris Rock should have thought about, in my opinion. He should have thought about the fact that she is human with human feelings, and making jokes about someone's appearance is just inappropriate. You can laugh about something that is happening, but not about someone who's facing something or who chooses to look a certain way or doesn't have a choice in looking a certain way, in that, for that matter.
Does that justify hitting him, though?
Excuse me?
Does that justify hitting him, slapping him?
I don't believe that Will did the right thing by hitting him, though. I do believe that he could have done something different. He could have pulled him aside, or he could have, I personally know, I would have walked up to him, would have given him a hug, and would have told him and whispered to him, don't you ever do that again, because there will be problems. He could have done something like that. But Will decided to slap him, and it's not something I justify, but I also understand the fact that he too is human. And I think that I would say that is one of the most human moment that Will, or any celebrity for that matter, has ever displayed, because we always see them to be robotic. We always see them to be politically correct. We always see them to be appear in ways that society wants them to appear. And I think that was just simply a human moment. Now people are going to say, oh, he did laugh at the joke. It takes a while for some people to realize what's actually being said. And I would give Will that benefit of the doubt. Am I defending him for slapping him? No, but what I'm saying is that we all would have been affected, or we all would have reacted in certain ways. It's just that Will decided to react in a more violent way. And one thing about the society is that as men, we are trained to be tough, to the point where we think, instead of talking it out, probably punching someone in the face is the right thing to do. And these are very important discussions that we as men need to have with one another, so that we don't end up hitting someone on live television, or not even if it's not on live television, so that we can actually talk.
The fact that it was live at the Oscars, and the fact that this was a celebrity who's been in the public eye for so many years, you would think he would know better. You would think he would be a little less sensitive. I understand we are all human, and you have to give people the benefit of the doubt when it comes to that. But just given the arena and given who Chris Rock is and who Will Smith is and what was happening, the context of it all, you would think people would have their stuff together. I mean, we're in politics. People say much worse to us all the time. We don't go face. you would think someone in Will Smith's position would be able to maintain his composure a little bit better. And if he was in that frail of a condition where a joke is going to cause him to actually walk up and slap someone, maybe he shouldn't have been at the Oscars. Maybe he should have been taking care of his mental issues.
I think, yeah. So and that's really the thing. We as men, we are not trained enough to be in public spot and control our emotions. We are from a young age told to be a certain, we are told to be tough, we're told to be the money maker, we're told to not express ourselves, to the point where in public places and situations like these, we just don't know how to handle it. And you're right. Will should be seeking some kind of psychiatric or psychological help, but not just him. We all need to do that. We all need to do that, because there will come a time, if it hasn't already, there will come a time in one point in our life that we will get aggravated to the point where we may want to just slap someone to make the problems go away. Slapping someone or cursing them out doesn't make your problem go away. It just only increases it.
Yeah, I think it was a culmination. I think it was a culmination of a lot of things that's been bubbling over the last couple of years. Agreed that he shouldn't have, he should have done it, not slapped him, but he should have addressed it during like a break or off camera, just went up to him. Now if you believe Charlemagne the God from the Breakfast Club, he spoke to Chris Rock and said that Chris Rock didn't know that Jada Pinkett was suffering from alopecia. And so for him, it was just a short hair joke. So,
but that's people say much worse at comedy clubs. Even like you go sit in the front row at a comedy club and you got your girlfriend there, your wife, they might roast you, but that's what you're there for. I mean, you have to expect that in that context. It's the same thing. Chris Rock telling jokes at the Oscars. Will Smith is right there in front of him. You got to expect that, right? I mean, people at a comedy club don't walk up and slap the comedian.
Well, it happens, but not often. But I mean, I think from Chris Rock's point of view, if we believe what Charlemagne said, it's just a short hair joke, right? From Will Smith's point of view, it's his wife suffering from a condition that he's probably seen her cry about over, however long. And so I can understand the emotion for it. And if Chris knew the condition, then roasting her on that would have been very tasteless, because no one goes on and roasts people for their conditions or whatever they're doing in general, unless it's that type of show and people are expecting that to come in.
Right.
So
like at a roast, you might see something that goes a little further, but maybe not.
Right. And so, it's been a bunch of people on both sides. There's been people supporting it, people against it, and women supporting it, women against it. It's just, interesting. What I found the most kind of interesting is that they just let him sit there. Like security didn't come out and just like usher him out of the hall. Like, you just struck someone, dude. Like,
from what I read, they initially thought it was part of the show. They didn't know that was an assault that they just witnessed. They thought that was a bit.
Yeah, but I mean, after they realized it, like, okay, wait a minute, that was real. All right, we need to, like, at least in the break.
By the way, that speaks to the cynical nature of the society that we live in. Some people think that it wasn't real, that it was just a publicity stunt for the Oscars.
Yeah. I don't think that would serve the Oscars. Not so much. It wouldn't serve Will Smith very well, because his whole image that he's built up over the past 30 years would be damaged. And so I don't think that would be a good bit to let linger. Like if they did it and then told it, a little bit after, okay, that was a joke within the broadcast, but to let it go on for days and months or whatever, like it's going to be more damaging to his career than anything. So
we'll see.
Yeah.
I mean, because if we're operating under the assumption that it was real, we'll see then what effect it has on all the careers involved. Right?
Now, from a legal point of view, like, so some people were wondering why he wasn't arrested. Chris Rock declined to press charges. So if he doesn't press charges, is there any legal consequence for Will Smith?
Well, first of all, probably not. He doesn't technically have to press charges in order for him to be prosecuted, but I can tell you right now, it's very unlikely that he will be prosecuted if Chris Rock is not pressing charges, not cooperating with it. They're just not going to get involved from a criminal standpoint or from a prosecutorial standpoint. There is a potential for a civil suit, but you would need damages. So what are his damages? He wasn't really hurt, as far as I can tell. There were no medical injuries, right? So what would be his damages? Being embarrassed?
Yeah. And I think we should also give Chris Rock some props for his professionalism. He held his composure. And you could see he was about to go in, and he could have made the situation much worse because he's a comedian. Like, he could have made all kinds of crazy jokes, and he was about to, and he pulled back because that would have just exacerbated the situation. But it's kind of crazy.
Another thing is that it's a situation where everybody is making noise except from the actual person who felt bad, and that's Jada. So end of the day, her opinion is what's needed the most.
Right.
And any action Will takes has to be coming from her. Any apology Chris Rock makes has to be going towards her. Literally anything, it has to center around Jada and her opinion and how she feels. Because right now, it's just two men fighting over their egos.
And that's a good point, right? The whole conversation around this has really been centered on the two men. And it really hasn't been much discussion at all about what she might be thinking or feeling or going through.
Yeah, that was a cameraman fail for me, though. Like, I thought, when Will was in the audience and he was screaming back up to the stage about, keep my wife's name out of your mouth, the camera was too tightly on his face. So she should have pulled back a little so you could see Jada's face, her reaction, so we could see, but
maybe that was done on purpose to shield her.
Yeah, that could have been. Well, Lupita Nyong'o was all up in the camera. I'm sure she didn't like that.
Right.
But the one thing I wanted to mention, because it gets overlooked by this moment, is congratulations to Questlove. The Oscar that he was presenting was for Questlove's documentary Summer of Soul, which is about this unfortunately little known Harlem Cultural Festival that took place in '69. Over, I think it was like 6 days of all of these heavy hitters. We're talking Michael Jackson, we're talking Stevie Wonder, we're talking Gladys Knight. All these people came out to, celebrate and promote the culture. And he did its documentary of this lost history, this lost music history. So, so to speak, because it didn't get as much publicity, it's not known as much. And he got an Oscar for that. So I thought that was pretty awesome.
Yeah, congratulations to Questlove for that. But let's move on to what Mufazzal does as a district leader. We introduced you, of course, as a district leader. Some people may not know who are watching. It's always good to provide the service to the people. It's, town hall / civic lesson, whatever you want to call it. But we have a district leader here. So why don't we start off with the basics? What exactly is a Democratic district leader for those who don't know?
So I want to first of all say thank you, Mike, for having me on the show. Thank you, Jay. It's really a privilege and an honor to be here. A district leader is a party elected official, which means that not only do the Democrats have their district leaders, the Republicans have district leaders as well. A district leader is the executive member of the county Democratic Party, whether it's Manhattan or Brooklyn or Bronx or Staten Island or Queens. Mm-hmm. And in Manhattan, there are 8 district leaders per assembly district. And that's because their assembly districts, they have more people, and their assembly districts are more vertical. In Queens, we have 4 district leaders per assembly district. 2 women and 2 men. And every assembly district is divided into Part A and Part B. Every part has county committees or election districts, and every election district has 2 county committee members, 1 male, 1 female. The district leaders are in charge of those county committee members of their parts in that assembly district. The main purpose for a district leader is basically to build the party. they assign county committee members, and county committee members can also be elected during the primaries. The district leaders are automatically members of the county committee. They collect petition signatures to put the preferred candidate on the ballot for the Democratic Party line. That is one of the most simple tasks. Well, not one of the most simple tasks, pretty hard because it's during the winter season.
Right.
But we need to collect 500 signatures for each district leaders, and also the assembly member, and also the senator who overlaps that assembly district.
You're like a soldier for the party.
Yes, yes. We
I
need to
want to
collect
clarify something that you had said, because I know what you meant, but just for the people watching, every assembly district across the state is supposed to have approximately the same population, but in Manhattan, it's just much more dense. So you have more.
Yes, it's the same. Let me correct myself. Every assembly district pretty much more or less needs to have the same population, but in Manhattan is just a lot more dense.
Right, exactly.
And in Queens, a little bit more spread out. If you go upstate, you're going to see the assembly districts are bigger than Queens or Manhattan. Now, you might think there are a lot more people over there, but actually, it's less dense, and people are living far away from each other.
Exactly. So it's harder to get signatures. Even you got to drive from one house down to another. I wanted to ask you something. You mentioned male and female district leaders, male and female county committee members. This is something that is just something that we have. It's the law allows for it and the parties provide for it. Eleanor Roosevelt actually is often credited with coming up with a system because she felt that women at the time were not represented enough in government and in politics. And so she advocated to have a male and a female position. Do you think, though, in the year 2022, that this should continue? Do we still need to have a male and female designated position in each district, or is that condescending? Is that patronizing to women? Should it just be two and whichever gender you want? I mean, because there was a lawsuit you might be aware of not long ago where there were candidates who didn't identify as male or female, and they said that they were excluded from the process. So do you think the system is antiquated?
What Eleanor Roosevelt did was a legendary step to reform the parties in New York. And I believe that the lawsuits are for that same idea of representation. There are people who identify as women, and for them, we do need women district leaders. There are people who identify as men, so for that, we need male district leaders. And there are people who identify as neither. And for them, we need, I forgot the term for it. Gender fluid or queer, any terminology that identifies as neither a man nor a woman, or by preference both.
But how
something that identifies.
Would you have a seat just for someone who identifies as neither male nor female, or just be any gender could run for any position?
Excuse me?
I'm asking, how would you prefer the system to be set up? Do you think that we should have a male seat and a female seat, and then a seat open for someone who's not male or female, or should just anyone be able to run for any position, or how would that work?
We should have a third position, male, female, and a third position, and that one should be based off of how people identify themselves. It could be transgender, it could be it could be gender fluid, but it should be a position that represents that gender fluidity or the transgender communities.
So it should be open to them.
Yes. I
see.
That's an interesting take. Yeah.
Well, I think as long as it's open to them. I mean, I don't know if you want to have a seat that's dedicated to someone who's not.
Right.
I don't know if the population would support that, but as long as they're not excluded from the process. I mean, I think that's the big picture here. We leave them out.
Right. I think if you're classifying only that there's this male and female options, then it does exclude some folks. And I guess the other way would be to just do away with the necessity to have a gender specified person in the role, and just open it up to whoever gets, picked for the role. But then I guess we'd have to see if it goes back to what, the whole selection, the whole criteria was introduced for in the first place, of being too biased for maybe all men all the time because, it's a good old boys club.
Look at the makeup of the city council now. I mean, women finally do have representation in government, at least in New York City. So I don't know if we should assume that only men would be able to win district leader seats when women are winning other seats.
Right.
No, that's the thing. While the city council is majority women, there is a saying in my language, in Bengali, that gaining independence is hard, but upholding and fighting for that independence is a lot harder. Maintaining that independence is a lot harder. Yes, women do have the majority in the city council, and they've earned it, and they have gained it after years, centuries of fighting, I would say. There was a time when women couldn't even vote. There was a time when women couldn't even go to college or school. Couldn't even step a foot outside the kitchen. And now they're leading the world. But if we, if we say that, okay, so they have what they always wanted, and now it's time to go back to the same old, then we're not progressing. We're going to go back literally to the same old. It's just going to take some time. So we need to keep fighting. We need to keep fighting and keep these. We may not have an enemy to fight, but it doesn't mean we stop fighting to uphold these values. These are not even newfound values. These are values that's always been there, overshadowed by patriarchy.
Right. That is, I guess, the enemy.
Right.
Reminds me of, I believe it was Justice Roberts in the Supreme Court who was scaling back the Voting Rights Act and saying that racism is over now because we have a Black president, so you don't need this anymore. I mean, obviously that's a thing to say, and he was rightly ridiculed for saying that. So we got to be careful that we don't say just because that there's a majority of women in the city council, our problems when it comes to sex-based discrimination are over and gender-based discrimination are over. Obviously not. So to Mufazzal's point, we need to make sure that we're vigilant in fighting for progress and maintaining that fight.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I was going to say that was the exact same thing that I thought. It's like, yeah, it sounds similar to, the Voting Rights Act and them gutting it. And we see what has happened since some of those protections were taken away. A lot of the things have reverted and made it more difficult for, people of color to get to polls, or underserved communities to be able to get to polls. And so it shows that it's still necessary, even though, we're in a more a much fairer time than when it was enacted. Those things are still prevalent.
James in the chat mentioned gender nonconforming was one of the terms we were looking for.
Yeah.
Yes, correct.
So Mufazzal, you represent Woodhaven, Ozone Park, of course, parts of Queens as a district leader. I know you're walking around getting signatures to get back on the ballot, and also, as you mentioned, for other candidates. So you're talking to voters. You're out there in the streets doing the work. What are you hearing most often from people when you're out there now? What is the top concern that people have?
The top, and really the only concern that people really have right now, is public safety. And it is a difficult topic to talk about because everybody has a stake at it. So the way I go about it is by being mindful of everyone's concern. Yes, the crime rates are going up. Even a few days ago, one of my neighbors was robbed, and that was unheard of 5 years ago. Like right now, when I hear about it, it's not happening. It's not like it's happening once a month. It's not like it's happening once every 2 weeks. Burglaries, it's happening almost every week. Sometimes multiple times in a week. A few months ago, two police officers were shot dead in Harlem. May God rest their souls. And so a few days ago, actually this was probably a month ago, a Bengali guy in Ozone Park or in the City Line area was killed. So yes, crime is increasing, but we also have to be, and a lot of people are blaming it on the idea of bail reform. A lot of people are blaming it on the legislature's various actions, and a lot of people are blaming it on economic instability. And from the way I see it, and a lot of people do want judges' discretion during the trial process. Some people are completely against the idea of closing down Rikers. I think we all need to come together to understand that everybody, including the families of those who are morally corrupt to the point where they can harm someone else, everybody's lives are at stake over here. We can always put someone in prison and make sure that that person never commits a crime again just by keeping them in prison, but that's not going to stop crime from happening. That's just going to stop that person from committing the crime. What's really important here is to make sure the crime is stopped at the very beginning, at its very source. And that is economic instability. And when you go into the certain communities where there aren't enough fundings for going to schools, for public education, or public schools, where union trade working is not as vocalized, where the main focus is to have food on the table. When you go into you're going to see these kind of things, that they are just not making enough money. And they're not making enough money because, one, getting an education is hard. We as a society, we put way too much importance on college degrees than we do on skilled trade education. And that for that reason, I believe that it's when we need to get rid of the idea that the expensive education in college is the only way to go about it. No, it's not the only way. We can teach our kids to become electricians. We can teach our kids to become construction workers. We can teach our kids to run a shop. And back in the days, we did teach our kids through civic organizations to run a shop. We can teach our kids to be innovative so that they can have their own business. And back in the days, I did see kids coming out with lemonade stands. That was entrepreneurship right there. It's only when we implement these ideas with our kids in their upbringings will we see that slowly the economic system in our economically deprived communities are getting better. We need to invest in our small businesses. We need to invest in our civic organization. Nowadays, children don't even know what civic work is. We need to teach our children that giving is caring. Of course, you want to save up money for your future, but you also need to understand the idea that sometimes it's okay to donate to people. That's not socialism. That's just being kind to your fellow neighbor. When we implement these basic ideas, that's when we're going to see that the need to think about the fact, if I do this, will I have food on the table? These kind of ideas, these kind of fear won't be there.
Right.
We need to also unionize our workforce for worker rights. And when we do that, we automatically will be fighting for enough wage, better fair wage, better health care, and harassment-free working places, people are not going to be afraid anymore. When you take the fear aspect out of it, that's when people are not going to think about whether or not they're going to have food on the table, because they know for a fact that if I'm not afraid of working, I will have food on the table. We need to take out the idea of basic normal degree education out. Let me tell you, I'm a civil engineer by profession, and I actually work for an elected official. So my degree didn't really help me out over here. I know a doctor who ended up becoming a doctor and doesn't want to be a doctor. And I know someone who studied MBA, and that person doesn't like doing that. So it's not always about the degree. It's more about following your dreams. And that's something we need to teach our children. Now, that is where we stop the idea of crime from happening. Will that make crime go to zero? No. There will always be a fight for it. And that's where we implement ideas in our corrections facilities, where if someone goes into jail or prison because of rape, murder, molesting someone, serious crimes, drug dealing, they need to stay there and they should never get out. But if someone goes to jail for shoplifting and stays in Rikers awaiting a trial because they can't pay the bail, they can't pay the bail money, that I would say is inhumane.
It's a violation of their constitutional right to speak.
Right, exactly.
So,
and
you mentioned a lot of things there, and there's a lot to unpack. I did want to mention a poll that came out showing that 82% of New Yorkers now believe that the bail reform laws should be changed to give judges more discretion. So pretty overwhelming support for that. I've always said that as an attorney, I do believe that judges should have discretion. That's why they're judges. Of course, you want protections in place to make sure that there are no abuses. And like you mentioned, people aren't just sitting there on Rikers for years without a trial in violation of their rights. Of course, you need to have these protections and reforms to a certain degree, but you can't strip discretion away from judges entirely either. That's what their job is. So it is about finding that balance. You also talked about all these other approaches, and I'm glad that you did that. You can't only look at it in terms of strictly law enforcement, because that's something that you try to do after the fact. But how do you prevent it from happening in the first place? The Black Caucus, and then let me get the full name right, because it's not just the Black Caucus, it's the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus up in Albany. They just proposed a plan where they're kind of taking a holistic approach to public safety. And some of the points that they're talking about are more funding for mental health services, boosting wages for mental health workers, more investment in youth programs like My Brother's Keeper, it's the kind of thing you're talking about, really getting involved with our youth from a young age, teaching them values, teaching them about the community, civics. It's all very important. They're talking about reducing wait times for mass transit, so they're really branching out, funding anti-gun violence programs, expanding educational access through childcare, as well as public college at the university level. Again, we want to make sure that attending higher education is not cost prohibitive, and that we're giving people options to get educated. And like you said, maybe it's not college. It just depends on the person. And also providing public schools with psychologists and social workers. So these are all the things that the caucus is presenting. And I think it's a good start. I know there are some who are going to say, look, when crime is up, you have to focus on law enforcement, but you can't stop there. You need an all of the above approach. Otherwise, you're not really getting to the root of the problem. And that's what we need to do, the root of the problem.
Exactly.
And there's something I always say, that law enforcement is the equal and opposite reaction of when a law is broken. But what if we can create a society where the law isn't broken at all? So we need to focus on preventive measures as much as we focus on enforcement measures.
And this isn't actually, none of this is new or new news. Like it was, the Kerner Commission was convened in '68 by President Johnson, and that was to find out what caused all of the riots that were happening and whatnot. And the commission had put together this report and saying that there was lack of economic opportunities, lack of social programs, as well as things like racism, police brutality, what caused a lot of these rioting and a lot of this criminal behavior that was happening. And this was back in '68. And it was, kind of radical idea, like, oh no, we need, this is what it is. So they kind of ignored the report, but this was a presidential committee that was put together to investigate this stuff. And it's the same thing, you know, today. Like, there are causes behind it. You can't just throw more law enforcement at it. You got to deal with whatever is causing people or causing these conditions to come about.
You know what also happened in the 60s? The United States switched its approach to criminal justice from a rehabilitative model to a punitive model. They basically gave up on trying to rehabilitate people and said, let's just throw them in jail, you know, throw away the key and out of mind. And that approach doesn't work. You know,
the thing I see that happens in the United States is that either the country goes through rehabilitation or the prevention method and completely forgets about the enforcement method, or when they go for the enforcement method, they completely forget about doing the rehabilitation method. It's either or, which, if you can't use both of these methods at the same time, hand in hand together, because then crime will always be a problem. The enforcement and prevention method, both of them need to happen together. Now, it might be slower. It might cause things to be happen a lot slower, but that's the balance we need to eliminate crime from its roots. And it's gonna take some time. But I can assure you that if we go down the enforcement method, it's gonna stop crime momentarily, but it's gonna come right back out once the administration changes. And if you go the prevention route, it's going to take a little bit too long, and by the time you're done preventing it, we're going to have a lot of blood on our hands. But to make it optimized, we need to do both of them at the same time.
Yes, and this is something that I've been talking about, not just with this issue, but on all these issues. We need an all of the above approach. We need to look at it. It shouldn't be one or the other. It should be, how do we take all the good ideas that are out there? How can we address these things in the short term, but how can we make it better in the long term so that it's not as much of an issue in the short term anymore? We got to be doing it all. And I think that's what elected officials really should be focused on. It shouldn't just be the one short-term thing that maybe makes a good political soundbite or looks good in a press release. It should be, what is the long term? How do we address this problem, not just today, but 10 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now? How do we put things in place today that will make the system better and our society better as we look into the future? That's an important thing to do. I mean, I think that's when people talk about progressive, that became like a buzzword in politics now, but the idea is progress, right? Like how generate that progress long term. We shouldn't lose sight of that.
And I do wholeheartedly believe that you can, in the literal sense of progressive, which you just said means progress. Right. We always tend to divide our people by saying you're either a progressive or a conservative. But I can assure you that you can progress while having traditional and conservative values.
Exactly.
I am a South Asian and a very proud South Asian, and I love my culture. I uphold it, and there are very conservative ideas in my culture that I grew up in, and those conservative ideas made me who I am. Yes, sure, I did unlearn a lot of South Asian conservative ideas. One of them happened to be one of the South Asian conservative ideas that we are always learned, that the man is the bread maker and the woman, she's the food maker. And I rejected that conservative idea, and I believe that anybody can be the bread maker, anybody can be the money maker, anybody can be the food maker, anybody can be the household cleaner, anybody can raise their children. You don't have to be a man or a woman to do all that. All you have to do is be a human and treat everybody as equals. But I also look at the conservative ideas of my South Asian attire, which is the sherwani, which I wear with pride in every time there's an event. And that's something I uphold. But it doesn't mean that I'm backing down from going forward. I can still progress. I can still move to the destination of making an equitable society while also believing in certain conservative traditional ideas. And so we should stop dividing people based on the two words, progressive or leftist, or
Right.
conservative and moderate, because
But then even if you use the word
everybody is
moderate,
progressing from their own perspective.
people try to pigeonhole you if you're described as a moderate as well, because they'll say that that means that you're not passionate about any issue, you're on the middle of every issue, and it's not. I mean, I think we just need nuance. We need to get away from all these labels because they create so much poison in our politics. We need to have these nuanced conversations because it's the only way we're going to see progress. You're not going to do it if it's just you're on my side or the other side and it's got to be all or nothing. That's not a way to
Right.
that's a tweet. That's not a policy.
Right, exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And Twitter is not where voting and politics happens.
Right.
Yeah. And everybody has pieces of both. You know, people have some conservative and some progressive views. You know, it's mixed. So we've talked about that a lot, about the nuance that needs to actually be brought back, I guess, into the discourse, and less of this explosive rhetoric positioning.
And that's something I would like to ask Mufazzal as a district leader. How do you see that divide being bridged, or is it possible to even do it? I mean, I want to be optimistic and think at some point we can get there, or at least get to a better place. How do we begin to do that work?
If I identify as a progressive, but if I, as a progressive, can get elected as a district leader in a conservative district, then I can assure you that that gap can be bridged. This gap was only created in 2016 when Donald Trump got elected. Or if you want to go a little bit behind, further than that, this gap was created when George W. Bush was elected. During every presidential election, there's always a gap being created, and that's because that's because they keep debating, and I like to say, when there's a presidential election, everybody gets way too passionate about things. They forget about nuance, and even people running for presidency, they also, the only way for them to become president is by dividing and conquering, and so divide happens where I'm getting at with this is a divide of ideas happen at the highest level. Unification happens at the grassroots level. And if I, as a progressive, can get elected in a conservative area, if I can get elected into a grassroots position, I can assure you that it is possible to get people back together. I'm running for Democratic district leader again, and I have progressive endorsement. I have liberal endorsement. I have conservative endorsement, and I have moderate endorsements. I have, you name it, I have it. What does that mean? It means that I'm working with everybody.
So is that to just continue to work with people and try to
continue to work with people. If you disagree with someone, that's fine. We are human beings. We are not meant to agree. And we are Democrats. I am a Democrat. And the Democratic Party has always been a big idea, big tent party. We are not meant to always agree on things. That's what makes the Democratic Party a big political idea party. We need to practice to converse with people, to talk to people, even if they're different, and respectfully disagree if we must, and still have respect with one another. I disagree with so many people 100% of the time. We agree with one another, and that's why they're supporting me, because I'm upfront with them that, hey, I disagree with you, but I'm still gonna work with you in other capacities. Just be easy to work with.
With you all the time. I mean, it's one thing to say you want to work with people, but in the environment that we're in, a lot of times people are unwilling to work with you, or they're afraid even that if they do, they'll be kicked out of whatever club they're in, so to speak.
Yes, I personally have faced that, but and that's the thing. If the person that you want to work with isn't necessarily responding, go to their support base and ask and talk to them and prove to that person that whoever they're afraid of is actually willing to work with you. Sometimes you just gotta, like, instead of, I can grab my ear like this, or I can grab my ear like this, kind of harder, but I can still grab it. Sometimes you just need to go the other way around.
No, those are wise words. Somebody once told me, why bang at a window over and over again when you can just walk through the door? Oftentimes the door is not even locked. So
Right.
path of least resistance. But for those watching and listening who may not be involved in politics the way we are, but they still want to contribute to a less toxic environment, what do you think they should be doing when it comes to their social media habits or the way they're discussing politics, the way they're ingesting news? Do you have any advice for them?
Yes. You don't have to be involved in politics to make change happen. I chose politics because this is how, and that's the way I like it. Some people rather be in civics. They rather get involved in civic organizations. Some people rather just clean up their streets. Some people rather read the newspaper and have a conversation about it with their families. Politics and organizing isn't the only way to get involved. You can remain involved in whichever way you want. If you want to join the army, you're getting involved. If you're at your workplace trying to make your workplace a better place, you're getting involved. If you're talking to someone on a subway station, you're involved. So even if you don't want to be in politics, like politically involved, you can still remain involved just by having conversations. One conversation can change a person's entire perspective of how they want to live their life. And it has happened to me. And I can assure you that the first step of changing the society is by talking to someone.
Right.
Anyone.
And talking to people sometimes who don't always agree with you. I think that's the key.
Right.
We live in these echo chambers, and it's easy to keep repeating the same talking points to each other, but we're not actually moving anything forward by doing that, making things worse in a way.
Absolutely. You're just confirming what you already believe, whether it's right or not, right or wrong. And I think that's also a good point when you're speaking to someone who doesn't believe what you believe. If you are open and understanding of that nuance, then there could be a breakthrough there, because they're going to be in that conversation expecting a certain response from you, expecting that combative response. But if you're coming to them with a little bit more of an open way of thinking, or a little bit more of trying to understand both points of view and that nuance, they'll be caught off guard and they'll let their guard down a little bit as well. And then you can have a little bit more of a conversation. They might be more open to ideas that weren't what they were already holding.
That reminds me of the time when I was working in the state Senate in Albany, and we had some gun legislation that was pending in the Senate. I received many an angry call from people. I remember one call in particular, somebody yelling at me, but he was called prepared for a fight. He was expecting to fight with me and me to fight back, and that's what he was ready for. And I remember just saying to him, hey, listen, I understand where you're coming from. We have a Second Amendment, but it's not unlimited. There's restrictions that we can have. It says right in the language of the amendment that there should be regulation. But let's talk about finding that common ground and respecting your right to bear arms, while also respecting the public safety of everyone else. And let's find this nuance. And I also cited some Supreme Court cases, and we had a very intelligent conversation. It diffused it. At the end of it, he was like, this was a much more balanced conversation than I was expecting. I thank you for this. I feel good about it. There was no fight, you know what I mean? Because I wasn't engaging with him. He came in swinging. I mean, he was yelling in the beginning. By the end of it, it was actually a very productive conversation. And even I was surprised. It stuck with me because it wasn't where I thought it was going. But I was able to diffuse it just by hearing him out. I think it starts by hearing the other person and having a civil conversation, kind of giving your point of view while also acknowledging where they're coming from.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We have a few minutes left. We're going to wrap this up pretty quickly. I did want to go over our poll results from last week. I know we got some comments that we might want to read, and then we'll drop a new poll for next week. How about that?
Yeah, to remind people what the poll was last week was whether or not Cuomo should run again as governor.
Yes, should Andrew Cuomo run for governor again? And you did a poll as well on your stories, right? I know I had one on mine and one on yours. Mine was on Instagram. You had yours on Facebook.
I had both Instagram and Facebook.
So what were your results? Do you have them?
I don't have the specific numbers, but the percentage was in favor of Cuomo not running again.
Yeah, mine was as well. I'm pulling up my numbers. It was 73% to 27% in favor of Cuomo not running. But you also have to look at the breakdown of who's voting in these. It's kind of an interesting mix between, as we were saying before, progressives, conservatives, and moderates. It seemed like people who are more, just to I guess maybe I shouldn't stereotype, but just kind of glancing at who voted in this, it seemed like it was more conservatives and progressives kind of teaming up against Cuomo, whereas people who were more moderate tended to be more for him, which was interesting. In a Democratic primary, you might not have those same dynamics at play because you wouldn't have all the conservatives necessarily, unless they're conservative Democrats, but you would obviously take out the Republicans and independents from that. So it was an interesting poll.
Guys,
Yeah.
I just want to interrupt from it. I do have to take my mother out.
Okay, no problem.
Right.
Thank you for joining us, Mufazzal. You had
Absolutely. You guys have a good night.
Appreciate it. You have a good night, and good night to your mother as well.
Thank you.
Our regards. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So, yeah, he brought up a lot of good points, and it was good that he came on. So we'll see as far as Cuomo, whether or not Cuomo is going to run or not.
I did have also a comment I'm trying to pull up that I said I would read anonymously. I actually got a few comments that were interesting. You got comments on yours? Here we go.
No, not on this poll. Not on this poll. But I did notice, you noticed, because you were looking at some of the people that voted, and you could tell, you knew what, I guess, affiliation for many of them were. That's how you were able to extract as far as like, conservatives and progressives and whatnot. I noticed on mine, for people that did answer, I think most everybody were on the liberal side, progressive side. However, it did seem that there perhaps some older people were more in favor of him running again. And we're talking younger. When I say younger, I'm talking probably, under 40, seem to say, no, he shouldn't run again. So I thought that was a little interesting.
Right. And again, I don't want to act like these are scientific polls, they're just polls in our media, but there are interesting trends that we're noticing, at least among our followers. But I think are worth finding out. And like you said, I happen to know some of the political leanings of some of the people who are answering these polls, and I'm observing certain things about that. But one of the comments that I received, which I said I would read anonymously here, was, I'm sorry, but and he said 75%. At the time, I think it was leaning more for Cuomo. So he's saying, I'm sorry, but are 75% of the people that answered this poll brain dead or just stupid? I mean, I'm aware that there are sadly too many low information voters in NYC, hence why things are the way they are here. But seriously, do people not care that he's a wannabe dictator and a crappy elitist of a person severely out of touch with the average person? He was the absolute worst after Hurricane Sandy, only did next to nothing for weeks. So again, this was a comment that I received on my poll. I wanted to share that. Obviously very passionate.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't popular with some people, and I mean, just like any politician, you're not going to be popular with everybody. And it also can bring the question, like, he was already governor, he already had his shot, he was already in. Like, should we be putting the same people back in? Should we not?
Term limits. There are people who are concerned about term limits. In New York State, there are no term limits for statewide seats like governor. He had over terms already as governor. So should he really be going for another one at this point?
Right. Like, I mean, at this point, should someone else get a shot at it? Otherwise, again, like, he's had 2 terms, to give him another one, it'd be a lot of years that New York would have been under his control. And so, that can be an issue as well.
Well, here's another comment that I received. This person says, I really don't know. I prefer him not to, meaning Cuomo. I think he was a governor, but it's just complicated. I just think as a party, we look like hypocrites. We call out the Republicans for allowing people who did horrible things to run for office, but then we let Cuomo run. I just don't know.
Well, see, with Cuomo, has has he been actually found guilty of anything?
Not in a court. There was a
Right.
report that came out by the Attorney General saying that many of the claims were true, but of course he and some others have called that report into question.
So I think it's an important point. Had he actually been found guilty of the claims, and then people were encouraging to run, I can see more of that hypocritical talking angle, but if he hasn't been found guilty officially, then it's I think it's less of a hypocritical point, because it could have just been a hit piece against him. You don't know. But
Right.
I think to me that him being in office for so long and then to come back again is more of an issue. Like give someone else a shot. Let's get some other ideas in there, some other people at the helm, and that type of thing.
Well, it's always tricky, right? Because in politics, people are forced to resign for all kinds of reasons, all kinds of scandals.
Right.
Always isn't a conviction in criminal court. Sometimes the behavior isn't even illegal or criminal necessarily.
Right.
It could be just a scandalous act or a violation of the public's trust in some way. It might not rise to the level of a criminal case. Maybe there's no evidence to convict beyond a reasonable doubt, but maybe there's enough to convict in the public eye will force someone to resign under political pressure. I mean, I don't know if you want to say that unless someone faced a criminal conviction, it's as if they didn't do the thing, right? I mean,
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. That's fair. That's fair.
Apply to Cuomo, but I'm just saying that there are different standards to keep in mind here, and everyone has a different take on what happened, what should be the standard, and if it's disqualifying. A poll did the same poll that I believe was about the bail reform. In that same poll, they asked people's thoughts on Cuomo, and I believe I sent it to you as well. I believe it said most people believe that he did at least commit some of that harassment that he was accused of. I think everyone has an idea as to how much or how bad it was or whatever. But like I say, I mean, any amount is bad, right? You don't want to say that there's a good level of harassment. So most people do agree that at least some of it was true. Yet there are still many people who support him, and I think there's even some overlap. People who believe that some of the harassment occurred and would still support him for another term. So.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, it was the same with Clinton. There are people who, if he was able, people would have still voted for him again for another term, even after what he went through. And in that case, he actually did lie about it, regardless if whatever your stance is on him being in, his infidelity, he did lie about it. And that it can be a trust issue, but there were still a lot of people who would have voted for him to take another term if he was eligible.
Right, and that was all. I think that was interesting because it was what he was lying about that made a difference to a lot of people. Like if he was lying about nuclear warheads or something, I think we'd taken it more seriously. But like you said, a lie is a lie. Maybe what it's about shouldn't even be what's most important. Maybe it should be the fact that he violated the public's trust. Right.
Right. And I think, that is, I've always said, as far as, certain people who have this mantle of trust, like politicians, police officers, these types of positions, your trust is such a big thing that you hold. You should be held to a higher standard. And so if that's violated, then that's a much bigger issue than if the guy that sits next to you in the cubicle, lies to you about something. This person in this position holds this responsibility, holds the people's trust and responsibility of this society on their shoulders. And so they should be a little bit more accountable. So
especially when you're talking about speaking under oath and all these things.
Yeah, absolutely under. So people are going to have different opinions, and whether Cuomo runs or not, I guess we'll see what he decides to do, and then the voters will decide if that's something that they're interested in.
Right. He has the right.
He's not the only one. He's not the only one that's tried to come back and run again after having some kind of contentious issue. So
right.
We'll see.
Well, let's drop the new poll question for this week because we do get good response on these. We, of course, had District Leader Mufazzal Hossein with us this week, so it would be appropriate, as you suggested, to ask about the topic that we had discussed with him concerning gender labels attached to district leader seats. Should we continue to do this? I know that there was a lawsuit, as I mentioned, saying that candidates who did not identify as male or female were excluded from the process. But the entire point really of that lawsuit was not just to open up seats for these particular candidates. It was really to just dismantle the entire system and say that we shouldn't have male and female designated roles anymore, that in itself is outdated. And there was actually a judge who was very sympathetic to that idea. The case was dismissed on procedural grounds, but kind of interestingly, in the opinion, the judge wrote, "This is the way I think the lawsuit needs to be brought, not the kind of proceeding that you brought. Bring it this way." And he basically begged them to bring it again into his court because he wanted to deal with the case. I think in response, you have, I believe, the Brooklyn party stepping away from this male-female thing because this happened in Brooklyn, if I recall correctly. Queens has not done so yet. It seems like that may be where we're going, maybe even without the courts having to intervene, because it's arguably a constitutional issue. But maybe you don't have to go that far. Maybe voluntarily the parties will stop having these male and female positions because they don't need to. By law, they don't have to have a male and a female, but the law does authorize them to do so if they want to. So you could argue that law in itself is unconstitutional. You could argue that what the party is doing with another party is not the government, and that's an important distinction as well. Constitutional rights apply to the government, but you have so much government action here because not only does the law authorize it, but the Board of Elections oversees and administers elections for party positions like district leaders. So this is state-sanctioned action happening here. It's not just a party making a decision on its own. It's bringing in the state to enforce this and to sanction it, really. So you do have a potential for a constitutional lawsuit, but maybe voluntarily, like I said, they don't have to. Maybe the parties will walk from it on their own. So with all that being said, the question we want to ask is, should district leaders continue to have male and female designated positions, or should we have no genders attached to them at all?
Yeah, I think it's a good question to ask. And, it's one that's going to, take some trial and error, I think, because if to get rid of the designations, I mean, obviously they put the designations in place to make sure things were fair for women in a system that's generally not fair for women. And if we take that away, have we moved? It's going to answer the question whether or not we've moved far enough, we've progressed far enough to where it's no longer that case where things aren't as fair for women. So yeah, I guess we'll see if they do it or not.
I mean, and this is kind of what I was mentioning before. You can look at other elections. It's not like every election is gendered for male seats. You can look at local elections, and even bigger elections, because in Queens, a district leader race encompasses half of an assembly district, but you have sometimes women beating men in the larger assembly district. You certainly have female elected officials throughout New York City. While we do need to be sensitive to the fact that this type of discrimination still exists, and we don't want to just undo all the protections we put in place, we do at least have data to show that women can win elections on their own without being a women-only seat or a male-only seat.
No, absolutely. And I think, and it should be when it comes down to the voting of an elected official, that shouldn't really play a factor. So, I think it's, women can definitely win if they are, and just hopefully that since it's not a requirement, so it's not really a law that says you have to make this designation. It sounds like it's more of a guideline, but to, in that case, if they do away with it, you just wonder if people are going to revert to a more male-dominated thing for those positions, but you never know. Right.
And that's always a possibility as well. I mean, we don't want to leave the conversation at, I mentioned this already, but I guess we should reiterate, I don't want the conversation to only be, well, women have won elections, therefore we don't need this, because what if, sure, women are going to win more district leader seats, but what if on balance, now you have an increase of 30%, 50% more men all of a sudden because they're winning all of these seats that women had? That could happen too, right? So to your point, you don't know that it's something to be mindful of.
Definitely. So interesting discussion this week.
Discussion as always.
Yeah. And I think our guest brought up some good points as well.
Absolutely.
So
Any closing thoughts here?
I think I'm going to keep people's wives' names out my mouth.
It was good advice, I suppose.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, it just, it's everyone should have a good week and try to move forward. And I think what a good takeaway from this is to try to bring nuance back into discussion.
Yes, nuance, yes.
When dealing with, at all times, and especially when dealing with opposition, to try to, get to more common ground. And you and I have talked about this a lot, even, years back in the first campaign about how there is a lot of common ground. And oftentimes it's just, people are wanting the same thing. It's just they're talking about it differently.
Exactly.
And the language is just different. And so it keeps people divided. But if you break it down, like, you're essentially talking about the same thing. So that nuance and that openness to the nuance is really important.
And if you poll people on issues, you'll find a ton of common ground between Democrats, Republicans, independents, everyone. Like you said, people pretty much do want the same things. They just agree with sometimes the messaging, the rhetoric, and the nuance. But that nuance is really so important in figuring out the best solution to these problems. And to get there, you have to talk to people and appreciate everyone's perspective and not shut people out all the time. So
absolutely.
With that said, my final word is more talking, less slapping.
Good idea.
See you all next week.
All right. Well, good night.